Can you imagine discovering that something Americans would treat like a child safety emergency is considered completely ordinary somewhere in Europe? Keep watching, hit like, and subscribe now, because the next European habit might completely destroy everything you thought was normal. A baby sleeping outside alone while the parents sit inside a cafe sounds less like peaceful parenting and more like the opening scene of a police investigation in America. Yet, in parts of Scandinavia, this can be seen as perfectly normal. And that is only the first crack in the enormous cultural wall separating America from Europe. From Spanish beaches where topless sunbathing can happen without turning into a scandal, to European travelers casually crossing international borders for prices Americans might expect to pay for lunch, the definition of normal changes dramatically once you cross the Atlantic. While Americans stare at enormous trucks that look capable of carrying an entire apartment, Europeans can think nothing of spending $17 on a flight to another country, or relying on an electric kettle as if it were a sacred household appliance. These aren't just little habits. To an American tourist, they can feel like someone secretly rewrote the rulebook of everyday life. So buckle up, because we're about to enter a world where common sense seems to change every time you cross a border. Picture yourself walking through Oslo, Norway, with snow falling heavily around you and temperatures dropping toward -10 degrees Celsius. You're expecting frozen streets, bundled up pedestrians, and perhaps a cafe filled with people desperately trying to escape the cold. Instead, you notice something that makes you stop dead in your tracks. A row of baby strollers is sitting neatly outside a cafe. Inside those strollers, babies only a few months old are sleeping peacefully in their warm sleeping bags. There are no hovering adults, no security guards, no obvious cameras, and apparently no one screaming that civilization has collapsed. For an American, this doesn't look like nap time. It looks like the beginning of a missing child documentary. And the strange part is that this isn't simply some random act of carelessness. In parts of Scandinavia, parents have traditionally believed that babies benefit from sleeping in fresh outdoor air, even when the temperature drops below freezing. The idea is that the cold, clean air can help children sleep longer, become more resilient, and spend less time surrounded by indoor germs. In places where trust is high and crime rates are relatively low, leaving a stroller outside a cafe can become an accepted part of daily life. The parents aren't necessarily disappearing into another neighborhood. They're sitting right inside, drinking coffee and keeping an eye on the stroller from the window, looking almost completely relaxed, while an American visitor is mentally dialing emergency services. That difference in trust creates a cultural earthquake. In America, parents are often taught that taking your eyes off a child for even a moment can be dangerously irresponsible. Leave a stroller outside while you run into a cafe to grab a coffee, and suddenly you may feel like you volunteered for a community trial. Someone is judging you. Someone is watching you. Someone is probably wondering whether they should call the authorities. The American version of childhood safety can feel like living under permanent surveillance, with cameras, locked doors, fences, alarms, and every imaginable precaution surrounding the child. Meanwhile, Scandinavian parents can appear almost offensively calm. Their babies are sleeping in the freezing air while their parents sip hot espresso inside. No GPS tracker attached to the diaper, no futuristic communication device strapped to the stroller, no dramatic security operation, just trust. And that may be the part that hurts the most. Americans often describe their country as the ultimate land of freedom, yet this European habit reveals an uncomfortable contradiction. Freedom means something very different when you don't feel constantly threatened. One society builds taller fences and watches more closely. The other can leave a sleeping baby outside and trust the community around them. So imagine letting your grandchild spend 15 quiet minutes outside in the winter because you believe the fresh air will strengthen them. Would you be praised as the grandparents of the year? Or would someone knock on your door wearing a badge? Would you rather enjoy a peaceful coffee while your child sleeps outside, or keep your eyes locked on the stroller like you're guarding a priceless witness in a crime thriller. That level of community trust is difficult for many Americans to comprehend. But if you think that is shocking, wait until you discover how differently Europeans treat the human body. Now travel south to Spain, toward the sunny beaches of Costa del Sol, and prepare for another cultural collision. If you arrive with a traditional American attitude toward public nudity, your brain may experience what can only be described as cultural whiplash. On many Spanish beaches, topless sunbathing can be treated as completely ordinary. Nobody screams, nobody runs for cover, nobody acts as though civilization has entered its final 5 minutes. A woman can simply lie in the sun, and everyone around her carries on with their day. For an American tourist, however, the reaction can be completely different. Imagine walking along a beach after spending 2 years away from that environment, turning a corner, and suddenly seeing a topless woman. Your first thought might genuinely be, "Oh my God." Then comes the realization that you're in Spain, where this can be viewed as normal. The shock isn't necessarily judgment, it's conditioning. Americans grow up in a culture where public nudity can be treated as controversial, inappropriate, or automatically sexual. So when the same body appears on a European beach without the surrounding drama, the American brain almost has to reboot. One traveler described exactly this kind of reaction, explaining that she wasn't trying to criticize anyone and didn't consider the practice inherently wrong. She simply came from the United States, where taking your top off at the beach is not the usual expectation. Every time she encountered it, she still felt surprised. Eventually, she wondered whether she'd ever get used to it. And honestly, would you? America contains a bizarre contradiction. Violent action movies can play on enormous television screens without causing much outrage. Yet a tiny amount of visible skin can trigger an entire censorship machine, as though civilization itself is collapsing. The result is a strange cultural imbalance. Violence can be entertainment, while nudity can become a national emergency. European beach culture, especially in Spain, can turn that equation completely upside down. A woman sunbathing topless can be as ordinary as a man wearing swimming trunks. Even children running around without clothes at the beach may not attract the same level of attention an American visitor expects. For many Europeans, the philosophy is not about sexualizing the body, but about removing sexuality from the body. The human form is treated as natural, rather than automatically provocative. That can make beaches feel less like places governed by anxiety and more like ordinary family spaces. Families swim together, people relax, children play, and the body itself becomes almost boring. And perhaps that's exactly why it can feel so shocking to someone raised in a culture where the body is constantly filtered, covered, advertised, judged, or sexualized. One American living in Europe explained the differences even further. In Spain, she said, people can be completely topless on beaches and nobody seems to care. Whereas in the United States, that kind of behavior can be restricted or illegal, depending on the location. Then comes another cultural shock, the Spanish siesta. Shops can close during the afternoon, while Americans are accustomed to stores staying open almost continuously. In America, you can often walk into a store at almost any hour and expect the lights to be on. In Spain, the afternoon can become a pause button. Mealtimes can also make an American feel as though they've accidentally traveled through a time machine. In the United States, dinner around 6 in the evening is perfectly ordinary. In Spain, that can feel almost absurdly early. People may still be enjoying appetizers at the hour when an American family is already thinking about pajamas. By the time some Spaniards are beginning dinner, Americans may have finished eating, cleaned the kitchen, and started watching television. And then there are the portions. America has built an entire food culture around enormous plates, oversized meals, and the expectation that leaving a restaurant slightly uncomfortable is somehow a sign of success. Spain goes in another direction. Portions can be smaller, and tapas are intentionally tiny. You aren't necessarily ordering one massive plate designed to knock you unconscious. You're sharing smaller dishes, eating slowly, and turning the meal into an experience rather than a competitive eating event. Don't expect one little tapa to fill you up. That's not what it was designed to do. Then comes partying. Spain doesn't necessarily believe the night should end when Americans think it should. People can stay out until 6 in the morning, which suddenly makes that afternoon nap look less like laziness and more like strategic military preparation. You sleep first, then you party. It's practically a survival system. Tipping creates another shock. In America, the bill can come with an expectation that you calculate another percentage before you can emotionally recover from the meal. Larger groups may even have gratuity automatically added. In Spain, tipping is generally much less central to the experience. A driver or restaurant worker may receive something extra, but the entire system doesn't carry the same cultural pressure. And public transportation makes the difference even more obvious. In many parts of the United States, having a car isn't a luxury. It's a requirement. You need a car to get to work, a car to buy groceries, a car to visit friends, and sometimes a car simply to survive your own neighborhood. In parts of Spain, trains and buses can connect cities and airports in ways that make car ownership feel optional. You can reach an airport without turning your entire morning into a parking expedition. That doesn't mean one country is automatically better than the other, but the contrast is difficult to ignore. America offers enormous spaces, giant vehicles, endless roads, and convenience on a massive scale. Spain offers compact living, connected transportation, slower afternoons, late dinners, smaller meals, and a radically different attitude toward public life. One side looks like a Hollywood road movie. The other can feel like a European film where nobody is in a hurry. And just when you think you've survived the beach, the food, the nightlife, and the transportation shock, Europe opens another door. Literally. Behind that door is a European apartment, and suddenly, even the light switch is ready to confuse you. Walk into an apartment in Paris, Berlin, or somewhere across the continent after a long flight, and you may feel like you've entered an architectural puzzle designed by someone who secretly hates American tourists. The spaces can be smaller, the buildings older, and the layouts can seem completely unfamiliar. American-style convenience isn't always the priority. Instead, European homes often carry design choices shaped by old buildings, limited space, energy concerns, and traditions that have been around far longer than the average American house. Start with the bathroom light switch. In the United States, you usually walk into the bathroom and reach for the switch right there on the wall. Simple, immediate, logical. In parts of Europe, the switch may be outside the bathroom. Imagine you're sitting inside, minding your own business, when someone walking past decides to flip the switch. Suddenly, darkness. Congratulations, you've entered a horror movie produced entirely by European electrical design. One American visiting England described this exact confusion, pointing out that in the United States, light switches are generally inside the room they're controlling, while in parts of Europe, bathroom switches can be positioned outside. She admitted there was probably a practical reason for it, but still couldn't understand why the arrangement felt so strange. And honestly, if you grew up with the American setup, wouldn't your brain immediately ask the same question? Then comes the washing machine. Americans often imagine laundry as something that belongs in a dedicated laundry room, preferably surrounded by enough space to breathe. Europe can respond with a completely different philosophy. Put the washing machine wherever there is room. That might mean the kitchen, next to the oven, tucked beneath a counter, or even under a bathroom sink. For someone from America, seeing dirty socks spinning beside the place where dinner is being prepared can feel like a violation of the laws of civilization. But in many European homes, especially older or smaller ones, space has to be used differently. Utility rooms simply aren't guaranteed. One traveller explained that in England, some homes don't have a dedicated utility room, meaning the washing machine ends up in the kitchen, often hidden behind a cabinet door. And top-loading machines are less common there than the machines many Americans are used to. Dryers can be another shock. Americans often expect a washing machine and dryer to stand together like a married couple that never leaves the laundry room. In Europe, large tumble dryers are much less universal. Clothes can be air-dried naturally or hung near heating systems. The American visitor looks at the setup and thinks, "Where is the giant dryer?" The European answer can essentially be, "Why do you need one?" And then there's the refrigerator. One traveller staying in Boston couldn't find the washing machine in the kitchen because, according to American expectations, it belonged somewhere else. But while exploring the kitchen, she noticed something that completely changed the subject: the refrigerator. Huge double doors, enormous capacity, and a lower tray that seemed almost comically large. Her reaction was simple. She'd never seen a fridge that big in her life. That is the American contradiction in one image. The washing machine disappears into another room, but the refrigerator looks capable of storing enough food for a small football team. Then comes the appliance that has triggered countless European-American arguments: boiling water. Somewhere along the cultural journey, Europeans discovered that some Americans use microwaves to heat water for tea, and the reaction was almost apocalyptic. To many Europeans, the electric kettle isn't merely convenient, it's a basic household object, almost as essential as the refrigerator. The explanation often comes down to electrical systems. Europe commonly uses around 220 to 240 volts, while the United States generally uses around 120 volts. That difference can affect how quickly certain appliances heat water and can create serious compatibility issues when travelers bring electronics overseas. Suddenly, your vacation isn't just about passports and hotels. Now you're wondering whether your hairdryer is going to explode. One traveler preparing for a European summer explained that American hair tools, such as certain Dyson devices, curling irons, and blowout brushes, may not work overseas simply because of voltage differences. An adapter changes the physical plug shape, but it doesn't automatically convert the voltage. Using the wrong appliance can damage it, trip a fuse, or potentially create a dangerous situation. Some travelers rely on voltage converters, while others choose appliances designed for dual voltage. She even explained that converters made her nervous because some appliances became extremely hot or began smoking, which was enough to make her paranoid about using them. Her safer approach was to use dual voltage travel appliances, checking the product specifications carefully before plugging anything into a European outlet. The entire situation sounds ridiculous until you imagine bringing an expensive hair tool across the Atlantic and watching it become an expensive piece of smoke-producing modern art. And just when the electrical confusion seems complete, the bathroom introduces another surprise: the dual flush toilet and the bidet. Europe has long used water-saving toilet designs that allow users to choose different flush volumes. To an American visitor, the extra button can create an immediate moment of confusion. But the bidet is where the cultural battle becomes truly personal. One American reaction to the bidet basically asked the question many people have wondered. You use water to clean yourself after using the bathroom? The European response was almost incredulous. Most of the world uses bidets, so why wouldn't you? Then came the unforgettable comparison. If you got mud on your arm, would you clean it with paper or wash it with water? The American answer was that they would obviously use water on their arm. But when asked why they wouldn't use the same logic for cleaning themselves after using the toilet, the answer became essentially, I smear it off with toilet paper like a normal person. At that point, the conversation collapses into pure cultural confusion. The European side cannot understand the logic. The American side cannot understand why the European side thinks it is weird. Both sides stare at each other as though they have just discovered evidence of an entirely different species. And yet, Europe has its own luxury that even wealthy Americans might envy: heated towel rails. Imagine stepping out of a shower and wrapping yourself in a warm towel instead of grabbing a cold one that has been sitting there for an hour. In a European bathroom, that little detail can feel like five-star hotel treatment. A heated towel is one of those tiny comforts that sounds ridiculous until you experience it. Then suddenly, you're wondering why every bathroom on Earth doesn't have one. These strange designs, from exterior bathroom switches to compact kitchens, rotating windows, dual flush toilets, and minimalist spaces, aren't necessarily random. They're solutions developed inside older buildings and different cultural priorities. What feels inconvenient to an American may have been designed around safety, energy use, architecture, or limited space. But that doesn't stop the culture shock. Have you ever sat in a dark bathroom because you couldn't find the switch? Have you ever imagined someone outside turning off the light just to watch you panic? Would you give up the American microwave for a European electric kettle? And if someone handed you a bidet tomorrow, would you finally admit that maybe you've been doing things the strange way all along? But perhaps the biggest shock isn't hiding inside European bathrooms at all. It is waiting at the airport. Have you ever looked at the price of an international flight and thought, there's no way that can actually be cheaper than dinner? In Europe, that can be reality. While Americans can spend hundreds of dollars flying a relatively short distance inside their own country, Europeans can sometimes find direct flights between cities such as Prague and Spain for roughly $17 to $60. Low-cost airlines have transformed international travel into something that can feel almost as casual as taking a bus between neighboring cities. For an American, that price can trigger an immediate psychological crisis. We are accustomed to treating international travel like a major expedition. You save money, request time off, plan the hotel, check the passport, study the route, and perhaps spend months preparing. Europeans can look at the same map, see another country a few hours away, and casually decide on Friday afternoon that they feel like going somewhere different this weekend. What a place. What a place. But the ticket price isn't even the strangest part. The real shock is the way Europeans can experience borders. Think about what happens when an American crosses into Canada or Mexico. There are border crossings, security procedures, passports, officials, and clearly defined checkpoints. Now imagine jogging between the Netherlands and Belgium and discovering that there may be no dramatic checkpoint waiting for you. No giant wall. No intimidating line of guards. No cinematic interrogation. Sometimes the border can feel like nothing more than a line on the ground. You can cross from one country into another almost as casually as an American drives from one state to another. Except there is one enormous difference. You haven't merely changed states. You have entered another country, with another language, different laws, different traditions, and a completely different cultural identity. One minute you're in Belgium, the next you're in the Netherlands. No passport drama, no airport security, just keep walking. And then comes the painful question for American drivers. How much does your car cost you every month? For many Americans, the answer can become terrifying when the loan payment, insurance, fuel, maintenance, and other expenses are added together. The Scripps comparison puts that figure around $900 a month. Imagine spending roughly $900 every month simply to own the machine that takes you to work. only to sit inside it surrounded by traffic. Meanwhile, Europeans can use the same money differently. Instead of financing an enormous vehicle, they may spend it traveling across the continent. In cities such as Amsterdam, cars can feel like second-class citizens. Bicycles dominate the streets, pedestrians move freely, and walking becomes part of ordinary transportation instead of something you schedule specifically because you need exercise. That creates another cultural contradiction. Americans often complain that their communities aren't designed for walking, yet the country itself has become deeply dependent on cars. We drive to the grocery store, we drive to restaurants, we drive to work, we drive to the gym and then spend money exercising because we drove there. Europeans, by comparison, can casually walk several miles every day simply because daily life requires it. They walk to work, walk to shops, walk to stations, and sometimes walk simply because walking is the easiest option. And then there are the trains. High-speed rail can connect major cities in a way that seems almost fictional to an American accustomed to long highway journeys. Imagine drinking coffee in a small cafe in France in the morning and eating authentic Italian pizza that same evening. No airport marathon, no endless security line, no sitting in a giant metal tube for half the day just to travel somewhere that, geographically speaking, isn't that far away. For an American, an international weekend can become a serious project requiring preparation months in advance. For a European, it can be an impulsive Friday decision. Should we go somewhere? Sure. And suddenly, they're in another country. This is where the phrase freedom becomes strangely complicated. America prides itself on personal freedom, yet millions of people are effectively trapped inside their own vehicles because their communities require them to drive. Europe can look restrictive in other ways, with smaller spaces and different regulations. But the freedom to move between cities and countries without a car can feel extraordinary. So if someone gave you $17, would you rather spend it on a meal, stay home, turn on the television and watch something you've already seen 10 times? Or would you use that money to fly across a border and wake up somewhere completely different? Would you rather spend around $900 every month feeding the endless machine of car ownership? Or walk every day while having easier access to trains, buses, and neighboring countries? Is travel actually expensive? Or have Americans simply become accustomed to paying more for the privilege? But if you think cheap flights are enough to make Europe look unfair, wait until you see what happens when the conversation moves from transportation to education, beer, healthcare, and time itself. Imagine graduating from college and receiving something that Americans often fear more than a bad grade: the bill. In the United States, a prestigious degree can arrive attached to a massive financial burden. The script places the average debt figure around $50,000, describing it like a financial tumor sitting on your shoulders for years, while payments continue and anxiety follows you into adulthood. Then look toward Europe, where the script presents students in some countries as graduating with little or no tuition debt. Suddenly, the definition of success changes. You don't just leave university with knowledge, you may also leave without a giant financial chain attached to your future. And the cost paradox doesn't stop at education. Walk into a pub in the Czech Republic or Germany and another strange discovery can happen. A large glass of beer can sometimes cost less than bottled mineral water. For an American, that sounds like somebody accidentally switched the prices. Water should be cheap. Beer should cost more. That's how the system is supposed to work. Yet in parts of Europe, beer can be treated as an ordinary drink enjoyed slowly and socially rather than merely something reserved for a special occasion.